Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and I am super excited to announce that we are starting a brand new book this week. Super excited because this book that we are starting is from a local author of this area. And if you guys don't know, maybe I've mentioned it in my previous videos that we're here in sunny, well, right now it's sunny, southeastern Michigan, Metro Detroit, the great state, the Great Lakes state, the mitten, as they say. And I have reached out to some local authors who are close by me in this area and got in touch with a few. So these next few books that we will be doing are from local authors in this area, which I think is really cool. Very cool to reach out to them and have them have a conversation with me. And speaking of that, we actually will be uploading an interview that we do with these local authors as well. But the first book that we are going to be doing in this local author series is a book titled Motor City Drama by Russell Lee Doré. Yes, so this book is a history on the making of the big three automakers. So Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Dodge Chrysler, today known as Stellantis, I guess, is the parent company, but at one point known as Chrysler. So we are going to be doing a deep dive into this book, very much a history book, and I'm going to be giving you guys some history play. It's kind of like he is painting us a picture with how these certain conversations in these important events of the founding of this automotive industry, the picture of how these conversations would go, which I thought was very, very cool, very readable book. And I learned a lot, and actually something we're going to get into in just this first chapter, Henry Ford Gets Things Rolling. I learned a lot about the Ford Motor Company that I never knew before growing up in this area. You know, I just never paid attention to it. I never really did a deep dive into it. But after reading this book, I'm starting to learn a lot more, and I think it's very, very cool. And I think it's very, very cool that back in the day when the car was the new thing, you had all these tycoons and these moguls, these iconic figures that, if you think about it, we go through these revolutions every so often. I mean, you could argue today there's a tech revolution. You have people like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, various social media companies, software companies, electronic vehicle companies, etc. So it's pretty cool to compare the times. That there's always people who rise above it, innovate, and give something to the world that's very, very special and timeless. I mean, all these names that I mentioned earlier, GM, Ford, Chrysler, they're still around today. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 1. And let me go to the first slide. There we go. Birth of Ford Motor Company. So this is going to be the first part that we go through. And I bet you guys, hang on, let me go to that page in my book. And I might reference a couple outside links for you guys, so I might bring that into the screen too, just to show you guys some of the research that I've done. So I might bring that up on the screen. We might switch back and forth. We're going to improvise a little bit. Today. So the birth of Ford Motor Company, part 1 of chapter 1. And what we have here, what Russell is painting a picture of, is a meeting between Alexander Malcomson and Henry Ford. This happens in the spring of 1903. Who is Alexander Malcomson, you might ask? Well, Alexander Malcomson was Detroit's largest coal dealer. Now, you got to remember, back in the days, I mean, coal is still used today, but probably took on a much bigger role in society back in this time period of you're probably coming right off of the Industrial Revolution. I'm sure coal had a big part in that. So he migrated from Scotland in 1880, and he knows Henry Ford because Henry Ford actually had two other automotive companies before being approached by Alexander Malcomson. So this is one of the surprising facts that I didn't know. Henry Ford actually had two other automobile companies. He had the Detroit Automobile Company, and he had the Henry Ford Company. I believe it was, the Henry Ford Company. But also, Alex knew Henry Ford because Henry had worked at DTE. Or maybe, I don't know if it was I call it DTE because that's what we know it as today. But Henry worked as a principal engineer for the Edison Company, which was located in Detroit. So electrical engineering, electrical output. And I'm going to try to pull up one of the links here. And if I can't get it up because my computer's slow, we'll just move ahead. But yeah, he knew Henry Ford from the time when he worked at DTE. While Henry Ford was at DTE, he worked on a contraption known as the quadricycle. Now, Henry Ford also had some experience, other engineering experience. He had worked at a shipyard, Detroit Docks Company. It was something like that. Some sort of shipyard building engines for maritime vehicles. Even before that, he had another sort of industrial job that he worked at. He started at when he was 16. Oh, it was rail cars. He worked at a company in Detroit that produced rail cars at 16 too, which is really insane, working long hours, hard physical labor at 16. But, he grew up in around Michigan. His family had a farm. He didn't want to work on the farm anymore. Lo and behold, he's going into the city and he's getting all these industrialized jobs, getting a lot of hands-on experience with engineering. He had two companies beforehand, Detroit Automobile Company and the Henry Ford Company. Both of these companies failed. I am currently writing a blog post detailing this rise of Henry Ford from basically up until his meeting with Alexander Malcomson. So tune in for that. So what do Alex and Henry Ford meet about? Well, they meet to set up a new company. Alex wants Henry to be the vice president and the chief engineer. Evidently, his work has caught his eye. Henry had the quadricycle. Apparently, he had some racing success, as Russell writes. At any rate, we're impressed with your racing success, and we know you have a lot more name recognition now. Your 999 racer really is a winner, especially with Barney Oldfield driving it. So I'm reading directly from the book here. So he's taken a notice, and I'm going to write about in the blog some of the, principal investors that came about to fund the Ford Motor Company. And I believe actually one of them was this character, John Gray. So Henry, Russell writes, you can imagine, is kind of a bit surprised. He's like, well, two of my companies failed, yet you want me to start another company. Like, are you sure you want me to do this? Basically. And, Malcolmson says, yes, we believe in your ability. We believe in your drive. So that's what ends up happening. At 39 years old, Ford Motor Company is birthed in June of 1903. 1903. And just reading from, maybe I can pull this over for you guys just so you see where I'm reading, because this is, let me make this bigger. So this is a book titled Chrysler, Ford, Durant, and Sloan, Founding Giants of the American Automotive. And I can put some of these sources in the description if you guys want to go take a look at it. Thank God this was on Google Books that I could reference it. By H. Eugene Weiss. Thank you, H. Eugene Weiss. So after the founding, in just 6 months, it made $100,500 and declared a 100% stock dividend. With their future assured, on January 26, 1904, they voted to buy an option on 3.1 acres of land that would become the future Piquette plant. We're going to talk about this later. But this, just because everything's so rosy right now, yay, we're founding this company, the Ford Motor Company, that doesn't mean that there wasn't challenges. Now, one of the challenges was with two brothers called the Dodge brothers. Where do we know Dodge? Well, Fiat Chrysler, Dodge Ram, Dodge Challenger. Yes. These are the brothers that helped build the Dodge brand. Another thing that I did not know was the Dodge brothers started out working at Ford. So let me get a couple of bullet points here. So they were actually started out as bicycle makers in the 1890s. Now, bicycles were probably a big thing before cars. Same thing with, horse and carriage still at this point. So that's how they made their start. They ended up running some machine shops in Detroit. And at one point, they ran the largest machine shop in Detroit. Primarily, they made engines, transmissions, various parts for a company called Oldsmobile. And I will never forget, my grandfather drove an Oldsmobile when I was like just a young kid. I remember him picking me up from school and driving me around, and it's so funny. But I believe Oldsmobile started by a guy named Ransom Olds, which is going to be a name that we get to a little bit later on in the book. So they're running this large machine shop in Detroit. Henry Ford basically approaches them and wants them to, essentially come work for him. Let me see if I have one of these links here. He wants them to work exclusively for Ford. So no more working for Oldsmobile. He wants them to work exclusively on Ford. So this was February 23rd, 1903. The Dodge brothers formally agreed to supply Henry Ford with 650 chassis for $250 each. And I think that's what I meant here when I said 650 sets of running gear, quote unquote. Thus beginning a profitable but stormy relationship between the two firms, this contract kept 150 men at Hastings Street plant fully occupied, and the Dodges began working exclusively for Ford. They ended up building a plant on Mack Avenue to assemble cars from parts made elsewhere. So the Dodges are making the parts, basically everything except the wheels, the tires, and the bodies that they are making exclusively for Ford. Let me see. Do I have another bullet point here? Yes, I do. And they are actually directly kind of responsible. They have a direct input into the Model A, which was the first product out of the newly formed Ford Motor Company. And it was actually a very successful product for Ford. Let me see. And again, Dodge Brothers were building the mechanical components of it. I wanted to pull up something about the Model A. Oh, maybe that was it right there. But this is a picture of the Dodge Brothers. It's nice little portrait of them. Yes, okay, here, the Model A, first product out of the newly formed Ford Motor Company. Dodge Brothers building the mechanical components for it. But there was issues with the Model A. I didn't necessarily want to get to. I do want to talk about the issues, but there was something about the cost of the Model A that this Hugo H. Eugene Weiss book broke down that I thought was really cool. I think this was it. Model A, the carburetor design. I just wanted to give you guys the price. So the new Ford Model A was introduced that year at $585 for the four-door sedan. Okay, this was later. This was in the 1920s, but the Model A actually came out a lot sooner than that. Anyway, we'll just continue on here because there were some issues with the Dodge brothers. And the issues arose from them not really being paid. And Russell highlights this in a conversation between the brothers and Henry, where Henry kind of goes up to them and says, hey, we have a cash flow issue. We have to delay your payments for the last few shipments. Delay our payments to you for your last few shipments. So shipments of parts that are coming in. And basically the Dodge brothers, they're not having it. And, you know, quite understandable that they're not having it. Let me see here. Because there's a book on the Dodge brothers that I reference. And there was a particular scene from the book. I won't take up too much of you guys' time. Because I want to find the deal that they struck with Henry Ford to basically keep the operation going. Let me see if this was it. Well, that's the deal that they made with Ford. So first Ford was of Dodge Production Engineering. The Dodge brothers delivered the first cars on their contract to Ford, but Ford Motor Company did not have cash to pay them. Dodge brothers took 10% of the Ford stock with $7,000 paid in as material and gave a $3,000 note. They were criticized for protecting their investment in that if the Ford venture failed, then they, not Ford, would own the tools and the design for the Ford car. This was the only prudent action when dealing with somebody who had failed twice. So that's what Russell highlights in the book. He says, okay, the brothers are talking. They're saying, okay, tell you what. We can squeeze by for a little while, but it will cost you. We'll give you $10,000 credit in return for 20% of your tools in the design of the Ford car. So they had a pretty sizable stake in here, 20% of the company. What ends up actually happening, though, is Henry, according to Russell, goes to John Gray, again, the president of Ford Motor Company. So that's who Alex Malcomson appoints as president. And again, remember, he wants Henry to be president. Why not do 10%? They say, okay, fair enough. And that's what ends up happening. The Dodge brothers continue to work, and all is well for a while. Now, the Dodge brothers eventually are going to leave Ford at some point, and I'm trying to see when that was, but because they end up in like some sort of dispute, like a stock dispute. August 1940, John Dodge simultaneously resigned as director and vice president of Ford Motor Company, but he and his brother retained the Ford stock that they had since 1903. Their connection with Ford was extremely profitable. Through 1914, they collected $3.8 million in dividends from their stock and earned another $1.7 million in profits from the Ford contracts. When Ford sharply reduced dividends to the stockholders in 1916, the Dodges brought a suit which eventually forced him to pay a dividend of slightly over $19 million in early 1918, with 10% of this going to them. Then Ford ends up buying out the remaining stockholders. Dodge Brothers accepted $25 million for their 10% interest in the firm. And then the combined sale of stock produced a return of $32 million in 1903. So that's the dividends, the profits, and then the sale of their stock. From an initial investment of $10,000. So when Russell here says, we'll give you a credit, $10,000. Okay, so yeah, so they put forth $10,000 of their own money. They got 10% of the stock, and they ended up making all in all $32 million, which who knows how much money that is in today's world. But the Dodge brothers had a huge role in Ford Motor Company by supplying the parts that made the Model A and then later other cars as well. So like I said, the deal is made. If Ford failed, they would own the tools and design for the Ford car. They wanted 20%. John Gray gave them the 10%. If Ford could not make payments to them for their work, they could sell all the unsold machines. So I'm machines. I think here I meant the cars. So if Henry wasn't going to pay them, they had rights to the car, tools and design of the Ford car, and then they could sell that. They could sell that on their own volition, make a profit off it, what have you, writing off overdue payments of $7,000 and extending for $3,000 in credits. So 7 plus 3, that's how Russell came to that 10,000 number there. Let's continue on. Last part here of Chapter 1, the Piquette plant. So Ford ends up moving plants. They have this space on Mack Avenue, and they need this larger plant. So Ford builds this larger plant called the Piquette plant. Now, at the Piquette plant, some significance to it is that here they are going to build the Model N. It's going to be Henry's, or rather Ford Motor Company's, well, I mean Henry's too. Ford Motor Company's car that will generate them their first profit over $1 million. Super, super successful. Super successful car. And at the Ford Piquette plant, there's an employee there by the name of Charlie Sorensen. Now, Charlie Sorensen is very important. Russell writes that Henry called Charlie Sorensen one of his most trusted employees. They called him Cast Iron Charlie, which is a pretty cool nickname. He's hired by Ford in 1904, but he's originally from Denmark. It seems like the Danes have a pretty huge stake in the automotive industry, because there was another Danish guy that was big in automotive. I think it was Bill Knudsen. Let me look that up for you guys really quick. Bill Knudsen. Doesn't that just sound Danish? He's an American executive, says Google. While this is loading, let's continue forward here with Charlie Sorensen. Chief Pattern Maker for Ford. Chief Pattern Maker for Ford, that was his title. But Ford has this conversation with Charlie. So he confides in Charlie that, hey, we're getting ready to make a new model, the Model T, the famous Model T. And in this meeting that Russell portrays here, they talk about a new model, or I shouldn't say model, but this new process that they're going to do to build the Model T. And it's called this crazy thing called the assembly line. we should also look, and this is Russell writing, we should also look at a new way of manufacturing it. You know how we now build each car on a platform and the workers bring the parts and their tools to the vehicle? Well, I'd like to try your idea of keeping the workers and the tools stationary and pulling the chassis past them as they add their parts. This moving assembly line could really reduce the costs of the Model T. So you combine that with this new steel alloy that they're going to use called vanadium. So they're going to make it lighter, stronger, and more flexible. They're going to reduce the amount of time to manufacture it by pulling it along this assembly line instead of the workers going to the car with their parts. So that could save time, reduce costs. Now that's going to end up reducing the price. And that's actually one of the things that was so cool about the Model T. Where'd my mouse go? There you are. Okay, it's loading. That was one of the things that was so cool about the Model T was it was like the car for the everyman, basically. It was launched in 1908, 4 colors at the price of $850. And then I actually think that they reduced the price even more down to, gosh, I think it was $500, if I'm not mistaken. We'd have to look on the Ford website for that. My computer just froze. That's okay. This Model T is also where you get the famous saying by Henry Ford, which is they can have it in any color as long as it's black. But originally it was offered in other colors as well. Hey, there it is. Super cost effective for the consumer. And it was a revolutionary vehicle. Again, using this new steel. They moved the steering wheel to the left side of the car so that when people pulled up to the curb, passengers would be able to get out, exit to the curb more easily. This was also innovative, I guess. The engine block and the crankcase ended up being a single unit. I guess on other cars, these two are separated, and I am not a mechanical, electrical engineer, so I'm not super familiar with the significance of having it be a single unit. And like I said, the affordability of it, $850 in 1908 when it first came out, but then look at that, the price ended up being reduced to around $300, anything like a car today. But you can imagine back in the day, looking at this, this was something. You know, this was like the Cadillac, or I mean, what's a nice car today? I mean, yeah, Cadillac. This was like the Cadillac of back in the day. This is really, really cool. I'll go to the next slide. I think that was the last slide I had, guys. Because I think next I just had my sources. Yep, there we go. Oh, Bill Knudsen, guys, was a leading Danish-American automotive industry executive. This is all from Wikipedia. He was a general during World War II as well. Wow. Franklin Russell. His experience and success as a key senior manager in the operations side of Ford Motor Company and then General Motors to commission him directly as Lieutenant General in the U.S. Army to help the United States war materiel production efforts during World War II. Wow. It's pretty impressive. Well, guys, there are my sources. There's a few links on just some things that helped me as far as getting information on some of the things here that Russell talks about in Chapter 1. Lots of really cool history that I did not know about. Henry Ford's previous ventures. I mean, his time at Edison. The Dodge brothers coming on board and serving an exclusive contract with Ford for the longest time. Then they had a falling out. And then the move of Ford from their location on Mack Avenue to the Piquette plant. They needed a bigger plant. And that's where they made the world famous Model T, the car for the everyman. And with that, guys, that's going to do it for chapter 1. Really, really appreciate it if you guys stuck with me this far. Let me know how I'm doing, guys, if you want to see something different. I try my best with these, so hopefully everything's coming out clear and concise. Check out the blog post. There'll be a link in the description for that. I'll include some links, some of these links in the description as well if you guys want to click on them and take a look. And guys, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.